welcome to the Good Girl Confessional. I am your host, Sandy Lowries, and of course the Good Girl Confessional is proudly brought to you by WB40 Women Beyond 40 magazine. Today in the confessional, I'm super excited because our very special guest is the world's very first female roadie. Her name is Tana Douglas, and she has written an extraordinary book about her life and her journey called Loud. Tana Douglas is now based in California in America. However, she is definitely an Australian girl and she hasn't lost her accent. Tana ran away from home at the age of 15, and instead of running away with the circus, she ran away with the music industry. Tana has worked with everyone from Acdc right through to Elton John. She's had an extraordinary career. She's brilliant and funny, and I'm really excited for you to hear her story. Welcome to the confessional, Tana Douglas. Okay, so hello, Tana Douglas. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
It's such an honor to have you, and really nice to hear your Australian accent all the way from the US.
Yeah, you know, people say to me, "You've still got your Australian accent," and it's like, well, of course I have. I'm Australian. what other accent am I going to have?
We seem to have this very adaptable accent, though. You know, it's like people go to the UK and they end up sounding British, or we go, you know, Australians who spend a long time in the US sometimes pick up the rolling R's, etc. But you've still got that accent. It's great.
Yeah, it's the one for me.
So I love your story, and your journey is incredibly fascinating. I recently read your book Loud, and congratulations on launching that.
Yay. Thank you.
There it is.
There it is, Loud.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who are watching this on YouTube, they're going to be able to see that book. It's incredible. And we will put up links afterwards as well where people can buy it and where they can follow you as well.
Yeah, it's in all formats now. So it's an audio book, it's online, and it's also in paperback. So
fantastic.
Whatever your flavor is, it's there for you.
That's great. Well, congratulations on launching the book.
Thank you.
As I said, it's a fascinating story. And for those people who don't know, you are not just Australia's, but probably the world's first female roadie.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it fell down. Yeah, I mean, obviously way back when I wasn't aware. I mean, I knew I was the only one out with my lot of people, but I didn't realize I was the only one out there in the world. So yeah, I mean, over the years, it's kind of evolved that's how it is. You know, I mean, it's, it was lonely out there for a while.
Yeah, I can't even begin to imagine, but I'm also fascinated by the things that you must have seen. So maybe start with, how did this journey start? Because how does a young chick from, you know, Brisbane basically end up being a roadie on tour with some of the world's greatest artists?
Well, you know, I had a pretty rotten childhood, so I ran away from home as soon as I could. You know, it's you know, I gave it a few half-hearted attempts when I was really little. I'd run away when I was really little, but you know, obviously I wasn't capable of staying away. But by the time I hit 15, I'd had enough. So it was like, I'm off, you know. So, you know, I ran away, and where did I run to? I ran to a music festival, you know. So, and having run to a music festival, I just never came back, you know. So I adapted to it quite well, you know. I mean, it was the Nimbin Festival in Australia there. And, you know, it was 1973, and I was 15 years old, you know.
Wow.
So, you know, we went there. I went there before it started, so I got to know everybody and help do stuff around the place and that, you know, trying to make myself useful so they wouldn't throw me out for being too young. So, you know, and then I managed to glom on to Philippe Petit's people, you know, who were then traveling down the French tightrope walk, who were then traveling down to do the walk over the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And so that all fascinated me, and I got involved in that, and without knowing it, I was involved in my first production. It wasn't music, but it was a production. We were producing this, you know, traffic stopping event over the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So it was really fascinating to me at the time. And then, you know, a couple of weeks later, I get a chance to work with a band, and it's like, I'm in. This is cool, you know. So yeah, it was off and running, no stopping me.
Incredible. And for those listening who don't realize, Nimbin is probably still like considered quite a alternative hippie kind of town. And the Nimbin Festival, of course, was, started during the heyday of the hippie era. So do you think it was easier to sort of be able to blend in and do that sort of stuff as a 15-year-old, in the 70s as opposed to now?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, if there was a 15-year-old out there now trying to do what I did, I mean, there'd be all sorts of things. There'd be police involved. There'd be all sorts of things. I mean, traveling across state lines, doing things like that. I mean, my God, people could get in serious trouble, even though they didn't know they were doing anything wrong necessarily. I mean, I think my advantage was I grew up really quickly as a survival technique, and so no one ever asked me my age. It's no one ever said like, you look really young. How old are you? Never, it was just the strangest thing. And all the time when I started working, with bands, never asked me my age, excuse me. So, it's just one of those things, and like the members of Acdc, when they found out after the fact, my age, they're like, no, what, really? No.
There were different times. I mean, I do remember, even in the 80s, I was sneaking into, live venues or clubs at a really young age. And as you say, no one was really asking my age, or no one was stopping me at the door to say, hey, you look too young, you can't come in. I think, times they've changed a lot. And also, as you say, people are much more mindful now of, there's a lot more penalties, and people have driver's license that are plastic now, not paper.
Exactly. Everything's got your photo ID on it, so it's one of those things where you can't really blag it that much. I mean, if there's a couple of years between you and your sister and you happen to look alike, then, you might get away with it. But apart from that, I mean, if you're a runaway kid on their own, you're not going to get anywhere.
No way. Far out. Yeah. So you end up in Sydney, as you say, with this heart-stopping kind of thing that happened, which was, I guess at the time, highly illegal, having a French tightrope walker scaling across Sydney Harbour Bridge, and you're part of this. So you kind of jump in a van in Nimbin with these guys and head on down to Sydney for this extraordinary event. Had you been to Sydney before?
I'd never been to Sydney, and the choice was I could either go back into the rainforest with my hippie friends, or I could go down to Sydney where I'd never been with this tightrope walker. I mean, hands down, I mean, I'd already spent, the whole Nimbin time, it's right on the edge of a forest and all that sort of stuff. And it had rained a lot of the time. And it was like, oh God, I just need to dry out a little bit. I don't need to sign myself up for more of that just yet. I need a little bit of a break. So, excuse me, sorry, I've got a tickle in my throat. So I was more than happy to go down to Sydney. Plus it was exciting. It was like this tightrope walker. It was like, and he didn't speak much or anything. I mean, he was French. He spoke a little bit of English, but he's just this really quiet, intense little guy, and it was like, so it was all just really exciting to me. It was like, what is it? And then when I actually got to the Harbour Bridge for the first time and looked up at those two towers, on the north side, and they're like, yeah, we're going to run that wire between there and he's going to walk across. It's like, no.
And to this day, it's still mind-blowing, right? That they were able to set it up and just pull it off. I mean, to this day, that's kind of, to see that footage is quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, that's what he did. He did it with like Notre Dame. He did it at Notre Dame. He did it at the Louvre. He would turn up at these like famous buildings or icon monuments or whatever, and he'd climb them and walk all over them and stuff. I mean, that was his forte. The Australian Council just didn't realise it at the time. They thought they were bringing a little bit of culture into Australia. They didn't realise he was a bandit.
He's kind of like the Banksy of tightrope walkers, right?
Exactly. He can't help himself, I mean, because he did Twin Towers straight after that.
Yeah, wow.
That's when he walked across the Twin Towers.
Crazy.
So,
Crazy.
Yeah, so, I mean, he just can't. The boy can't help himself.
And just feelers. Talk about nerves of steel. Good grief. Like
lying down. He stops and he lies down on I mean, to me, walking across it's one thing. but to actually stop and lie down
Oh, do you know what? As
and get
someone
back
who
up
has,
again.
as someone who's got a fear of heights, I could get the jitters even thinking about it. Seeing sort of the footage, it's quite extraordinary, and I just
Yeah.
think, wow, unbelievable. So from there, as you say, you get this chance to work with a band. So who was the first band that you worked with?
So the first band I worked with was a band called Fox. And there was a guitar player called Peter Laffey who went on to do quite a bunch of different stuff. Yeah, I think he was with Renee Gayer for a bit and a few different other people, A good guitar player, just had a troubled life. But anyway, what happened was I'd moved to the Cross like after this whole Philippe thing and a bunch of other stuff had happened to me, and I ended up back in Sydney. And I was in King's Cross, and I got myself in trouble, with the actual local hooligans of the Cross, the gangster types and stuff. And so I knew I had to get out. So I moved in with these two young girls, and it was a whole different vibe. It wasn't the sleazy back streets of the Cross and clubs and, and just pool halls and all that sort of stuff. So I felt, much better about myself with these two young girls. And they're like, and they'd go to all the clubs and they know all the doormen and, different bands and stuff. And I knew nothing, you know what I mean? And they're like, come with us, come down to the Whiskey A Go Go. And that was the first club I ever went to, was the Whiskey in Sydney. And, that they sort of introduced me to people. So that's how I got a taste for it. And then one of them had to go back to Melbourne, and she said, oh, this band's coming up, and I think they'll give me a free ride back down to Melbourne. And we're like, great, because she didn't have any money. She wasn't paying her rent. It was like, cool, get rid of her and get someone in who can pay the rent, So we all went off to the show to make sure that she got this ride down to Melbourne. But it wasn't kind of going that way. Everyone's sitting around being nice and chatty and stuff, but no one's broached the subject of, can we get her a lift back to Melbourne, So finally I put my hand up. I didn't know anyone there, I'm like, so can we get her a lift back to Melbourne with you guys? She said that you might give her a lift. And Peter Laffey, the guitar player, who was such a rogue, and it's a great character, and he looks at me and he looks at the stage and he says, well, if those guys finish loading out tonight, she can go in the truck with them. Otherwise forget it. And the forget it bit was the bit that, got me bothered. It's like, because I looked at the stage, there was two road guys staggered about, and it was like, oh God, they're lucky if they find the door, let alone get out and drive a truck, So I the first thing that came to my mind was, well, what if I give them a hand? Thinking, that's would be a good idea to sort of give them a hand. And everyone just laughed, and I'm like, well, and so Peter thinks it's hilarious. So he yells over to the stage, goes, yo, guys, and they sort of stop and look, this chick here, this Sheila's going to give you a hand. Go on, go down. So go put her to work. She's going to give you a hand. And they're like, oh, no, but they can't say anything because the band's their boss, you know what I mean? So they're like, oh, Jesus, So I go bounding over, thinking just let's get her out of town, you know what I mean? So, and they're like, oh, they gave me the drum kit to play with because they figured I probably couldn't hurt myself too much with that. So I put that away, and I thought I was quite proud of myself. And it's like, okay, what else could I do, So they looked at me and they've like given me cables, because cables in clubs are just disgusting. People do all sorts of horrible things, So they figured they'd get rid of me if they gave me the cables, and say, no, I'm doing it all. And they're like, oh, maybe she's a little tougher than she looks, this one, And so then it got to the loading, and it made them work faster too, because they're like, well, hang on a minute, who's she? Hang on. So all of a sudden they're working a lot faster and a lot better, and it's sort of given them a second wind, So maybe they're just trying to get away from me. I don't know. But and then it comes time to load the truck, and it's like, oh, I'll give you a hand. They're like, no, this is man's work, And I'm like, oh, geez. And so then they realize, they go, oh, you're quite strong, aren't you? I said, well, yeah. Doing that as well. So sure enough, the girl gets a lift back to Melbourne, so everything, mission accomplished, like, yay. And oops. So I go ahead and we all go back. We go back to our flat, the girl and I, the remaining two of us. And 2 weeks later, they call and they say, we're coming back to Sydney. Do you want to come to the shows and give us a hand? And I'm like, oh, that'd be fun. Yeah. And then they paid me. It was like, and then they're like, I did maybe 10 shows or something. And then they're like, well, do you want to keep doing it? Because we've got to go back to Melbourne. It means you'd have to come to Melbourne. And I'm like, thank God, get me out of the cross. I got myself in all sorts of trouble there. It really was ugly. So it was like, yeah, get me out of here quick. I didn't tell them that, but yeah, I'll go. So yeah, that was the start of it. And then, within a matter of a couple of months, I'm at the original Mushroom House in Melbourne, which was on Wellington. And that was like also premier artists and all the original scene of the Australian music scene really came out of that building. And that's where we'd go each week to get our worksheets so we know what shows we were doing, I'd go and pick them up from the booking agents. And that's where I got offered a job to work for a different band. And that band turned out to be Acdc.
Okay, so this is an extraordinary story because obviously Acdc went on and continues to be one of the world's biggest bands and most iconic bands, and certainly probably the most iconic band to come out of Australia. So you end up working with these guys. You had no idea, they had no idea they were going to be that big either, I'm guessing at the time.
Yeah, there was something about them. They had conviction way from the beginning. There was conviction there, and there was nothing was going to get in their way. And you could feel it, and you could feed off that. It was a definite energy, and you did feed off it. And it was just, they just weren't going to be stopped. Malcolm was like, he was just like, boom, tunnel vision. And Angus was right there with him, Bond's like, whatever it takes, and then the others, Phil and Mark were like, okay, whatever, we'll keep up, But it was definite, it was a vision from the start, I thank them to this day for my work ethic. I really do. They instilled in me an incredible work ethic, which was the same work ethic that they had themselves, and it's, and living in the house with them, it was interesting. It was really an interesting time. We were all really young, except for Bond. It was
and I think a
joking.
lot of people don't maybe realise that. So these are like hardcore working class Scottish boys, living in Australia and forging a band. And Bon Scott, as you say rightly in your book, you talk about that he was much older, and it might have been quite a more difficult thing for him, maybe stepping in with a much younger crew.
Yeah, because Bon had been through it before, with the Valentines, they had a modicum of success, and then he did Fraternity, and I guess locally in South Australia. I don't know how much success they had nationwide, but they went to England as well, So he'd been to England on the promise of we're going to make it sort of thing. So I think Acdc was really something he took seriously, and I think he realised that if he didn't do this, he may not get another chance. So he was fully on board, and more power to him, because not many front men, lead singers, would share the light as much as he did with Angus. And he was totally on board for that. And you can tell by their interaction, it was just, they set that, that wasn't scripted. That happened by Bond going, yes, let's make this happen, and let's bring him up, let's bring him forward, and let's share the spotlight,
Yeah, which is kind of amazing, then, isn't it?
Yeah, and then Brian, obviously, that was already established as the band format when Brian stepped in, and more power to him too. He continued it, So,
yeah, it's great. It's really great, and such a tragedy, years later when the world would lose Bond. But
no, it's very sad.
Yeah. So you end up, what an amazing experience. So people who've read the book will know this, and others should rush out and read this book, but you get to live in this house with Acdc as they're building the brand, recording the album, the first album, all of that was going on. So tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. When I first got offered the job, it was, I was down there working with Fox still, and it was, a guy called Bill Joseph, who was incredible man in the music industry, really good man. And he was one of their original managers with Michael Browning. There was two of them in the beginning. And they both also owned the Hard Rock, which was the venue that we played. But he must have seen something in me, because he approached me and he said, you'd consider working for another band. And of course, it turned out to be Acdc. So when I said yes, he introduced me to Michael Browning, who threw me in his car and said, well, let's go around to the house now and meet the boys, and let's see if we think it's going to work. So it was all very whirlwind and quick, So it was like, oh, okay, So we went to what is now the notorious house on Lansdowne Road, which I think it's finally been torn down actually, but I think it's a block of flats or something now. But anyway, it's no loss, I don't think, to the world. But I turn up there and we go inside, and at the time they didn't have Phil the drummer or Mark the bass player, so there was only Malcolm, Angus, and Bon, and the other two people in the room were Harry Vander and George Young, because they were just working on the album, so High Voltage, they were working on that. And they'd just come down to sign the contracts with the new management. And part of the deal was that they moved to Melbourne. That was part of the deal of the contract. So, but they were still recording in Sydney at Albert's, So I just sort of, timing was good, I arrived, they were all talking amongst each other, and I'm kind of looking going, this is a weird combination for a band, because I'm seeing 5 people and like I say, like Bon was similar age to Harry and George, and then there's Malcolm and Angus, who are both tiny, and it's like, what is going on here in this room, because I had no idea who ACDC was, no one had really seen them at that point, because they'd had that other lead singer and they'd really only done shows in Sydney, a couple, one in Melbourne and Adelaide and Perth or something before they broke up, But so it was interesting, I got Brother George, as he was called, obviously, he took the lead and he says, come on over here, Tana, come on, we'll introduce you to everyone. And so he introduced me to everyone one by one. And, we start talking and stuff. And there was just an energy in that room. And it was amazing. And it was like, I don't know what this is, but whatever it is, I'm in. Sign me up, Plus, it got me out of my mother's house, thank God, because I had to move in with her when I came down from Sydney with Fox, because I didn't have any money. So I could pay her a little bit of rent and hopefully not ever see her. You know what I mean? But this was but the good deal with this was you got to live, like you got somewhere to live as well. And it was like, oh, sign me up. Thank God.
How great is that? And what an extraordinary experience. Well, right. And I can only imagine, these boys have a reputation of being hard rockers, but it would have been a really interesting experience to be the only permanent chick living in the house.
Well, it was. And it was also a time where they were all getting to know each other as well. So it was a slightly different vibe, So we'd spend nights sitting around listening to different music, and everyone would pick music that they liked, and then they'd talk about it. And what do you think about this field? Like Tres Hombre was a big album in the house, for example. Bad Company was a big album in the house. There was a few albums, that got played again and again, and it was all looking for a feel, that the direction they were going in, so what do you think of this and what do you think of that? And, so there was a lot of great conversations, and then there'd always be instruments where they'd just pick up a guitar and start playing a riff or something. So it was really a special time to be there with them, until all the shows kicked in. Then we didn't have time to do anything but play. but that's okay. That's what it was all about. So, but that time before was quite special.
And so how long were you with the boys? How long did you stay with ACDC before you moved on?
74 or 75. Now, when they went in the studio to do TNT, by then I was doing their front of house sound. I started doing their back line, looking out for their on stage equipment. And when we figured out that we needed our own PA, and we needed a bigger PA because Von's vocals, we had to get him up over that wall of Marshalls and stuff. And so when we picked up the new PA, all of a sudden I became the front of house sound engineer, which was like, what? Wait, what? No lessons, no nothing. Just, you can do that. The sound we want. So it was like, oh, okay. So because I was doing front of house sound at that stage, when they went up to the studio, plus they were going to take Christmas off to spend, with families. So, to me, that was, we hadn't stopped. From the day I walked into the house until that time, we hadn't stopped. It was just constant shows and shows and shows and TV and shows and just no time off. And it was like, if I don't do something now, once this album's out, they're going to the next level. And I'm not going to be prepared for that because no one's still taught me anything. So I knew I had to learn, so I took that opportunity to leave, which was sad, but I decided this was going to be my career. So I had to put that first, So I did. And it turned out to be great timing, because within a couple of weeks, I'm working for the number one promoter in Australia, Paul Dainty. So it was good. So I built a reputation over that time I'd been with them as a really good hard worker, someone who got on with the other crews and, you know, other bands and that sort of stuff, and did the right thing by people. So that meant that when they were looking for a crew, now, did I do sound, which is what I was doing? No, I actually did lighting, because they had a sound and a lighting rig. And sound, there was a lot of good sound engineers in Australia, because sound had been going a lot longer. You know, I mean, sound had become a thing, you know, since the Beatles sort of said, no one can hear us anyway because the PA is too small. Well, that got changed really quickly to the PA is not too small. And bands like The Who and, you know, Grateful Dead and people like that had these walls of sound, you know, but lighting was still new. So I kind of made a choice that if I went and did lighting, then that'd be a more even playing field for me, you know, because everyone was learning. So, you know, as long as I learned quickly and I learned well and did a good job, I was set, you know, and it turned out I was, because I did that for a long time, you know, after that.
It's fantastic. And I love that, you know, you were savvy as well, you know, and figured that out, that, you know, to say a lot of sound engineers out there, but was great that you got in on the ground floor really with these huge lighting rigs. And they start out,
Yeah, and I didn't
small,
want,
and then they get bigger and bigger.
they started off quite small, but you know, I didn't want to test that. I was getting on well with the guys, but I didn't want to test that. Are they going to give me a job over one of their mates they've had for 10 years? You know what I mean? Because it was a boys' club. It really, and it still is even to this day, not 100% as it was. But so I didn't want to push that. I didn't want to lose my seat at the table. I'd fought for it and I've got one. But, you know, how do I hang on to it now? That was as much a fight as the day-to-day work. It's like, how do I keep this position? How do I make it stronger and how do I better it, you know? Because this is what I want to do, you know, because this way I can see the world, I can do all sorts of things, you know. So I was aware of that, conscious of that from day one.
Which is kind of incredible, because at that stage they're still really young, you know. So it's pretty cool that you figured this out at such a young age, and put your career first, and really started to then cement yourself not just as a woman in this industry, but a person with a great reputation in the industry. So that's really fascinating to me as well, because as you say, it was an all boys club, and I find this interesting in the book that you talk about really going under the radar in some ways of being one of the guys, rather than highlighting the fact that you're actually a woman.
Yeah. I mean, that was necessary, you know, and to be honest, what drove me was I had nothing to go back to. You know what I mean? So I couldn't fail, because I was doing good here, you know, and yes, I was one of the boys. I was drinking like the boys. I was swearing like the boys, loading trucks, grimy, dirty like the boys. You know what I mean? But they accepted me like that, so it was important, you know. And I was a bit of a tomboy anyway. Obviously, I mean, I wasn't aware of it, but I must have been, you know, or I wouldn't have, you know. But you know, I never painted. I still to this day don't paint my nails and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's obviously, you know, a part of your persona anyway, part of your character. And so it wasn't too big a leap for me, I don't think.
Yeah, amazing.
Sorry.
It's okay, amazing. And so with Paul Dainty, where's the next big place that you end up?
So I do Dainty, and from that I'm doing just international bands. So that's exciting, because what I'm learning is all the cool stuff's coming from overseas to Australia. And so I want to know where it's coming from exactly, you know. So I decide that I'm just going to go, you know. So I had to get my dad to, sign my passport, because I still wasn't old enough. But I wasn't going to wait, because again, I figured if I stood still, they'd leave me behind. You know what I mean? And that was just so important to me to keep moving, you know. I figured a moving target's harder to hit. So I'll just keep moving, you know. So, you know, I realized that, you know, when I changed countries, it was going to be pretty much like starting from scratch. And it was. I had to pretty much start all over again. I knew people that I toured with while I was with Dainty. And, you know, I probably made that time a little harder than it needed to be, because I couldn't ask for help. I've never been able to do that. It's one of my flaws. I'll help someone else, but I can't ask for help for myself. So I did make it harder. I'd sleep on a park bench one night, and then, a couple of nights later, someone would say, oh, David Essex's house. David's just going on tour. Why don't you stay there for a week? Because he wants to make sure no fans break in or anything. And so that was Swish, right on Abbey Road there by the studios. It was like, oh, that's cool. Right where the crossing is, that's where that house was. And, then I'm back on a park bench because I wouldn't tell anyone. I couldn't say, oh, can I stay another couple of nights? Or do you know anyone who's got a place? Or because I didn't have any money either. I mean, I left with a one-way ticket and maybe a couple of $100. But I got a feeling it probably wasn't even a couple of $100. It was probably just less. Which, I mean, how long is that going to last? You know what I mean? So I didn't have money, didn't have, I just didn't have anything except a will to succeed, and luckily, I stayed out long enough that, I got offered. And I think also because I'd done backline and sound and lighting, I'd do any job that came along, because like Pat Travis band, they needed a backline person. I can do that. So boom, I'll do that. Then someone else needed, a sound person. I can do that. Boom, and they're like, well, what do? Do you do sound or do you like? I said, I do whatever you need to have done. So that was kind of an interesting thing as well. It's like, I should do like pretty much anything. That's kind of cool because people would focus on one department, and I just figured I had no pride. I'm not going to say, oh, I'm a lighting person. It's like, no, I'm hungry. I'll do whatever you want. And if it comes with a roof, that's fabulous.
Even better.
Exactly.
It kind of cements you in this industry because you became such an extraordinary all-rounder and gave you plenty of opportunities to get then paid gigs, as you say, and working for some pretty big names. So
yeah, I mean, at one point I was sleeping in Paul McCartney's car because his personal assistant Trevor found out. Well, he didn't know I didn't have anywhere to live. Excuse me, but he knew I didn't have a lot of money, and he knew I didn't really know my way around. So he said, "Look, this is Paul's car," and it had the custom plates, everything, with Paul and MPL1, and all this. It was like his first car. It was like a Vanden Plas with the wood panels, the walnut paneling, and the drawers that dropped down, the back seats, and the little bar with the crystal glasses and stuff. So I had somewhere to put my toothbrush. It was exciting, really. So
there's not too many people who could say I just used to sleep in Paul McCartney's car.
Right. It had everything crystal decanter for my toothbrush. Exactly. So yeah, versatility helped. And then, when I got offered to go and work in a warehouse and build from scratch a lighting system, I mean, that's not a glorious job. And you're there 24/7, because that's how they did it those days. They would get in a crew and they would just work you. You'd stay there, you'd sleep there, which to me was no big deal because I had nowhere to sleep anyway. So it was like, oh, this is good. It comes with a roof. This job comes with a roof. I can do this. But what it was Status Quo's rig that they were paying for themselves and they were going to own and tour. And because I toured with them in Australia and I'd ran into them in Europe just before I kind of went to Amsterdam before I went straight to London. So I'd gone out and seen them for a couple of days on one of their tours in Europe. So they'd seen me a few times. They knew me. And when they heard that I was building their rig, it was like, oh, this is perfect. Well, who are they going to choose to take out on the road? Well, they're going to take me, obviously, because I'm the one who built the rig. So I know every square inch of that rig. I know all the dimmers. I know the console, all the cabling, So that worked well. It wasn't as glorious as saying, oh, I'm out on such and such a tour. It's like you're in a warehouse, it's freezing cold and it's dank and it's, you're working 20-hour days. But it paid off in the long run because we went out on the road for I think it was almost 4 years nonstop with that rig. And then when the band took a break, because they had to take a break for tax purposes, because, London, British taxes are ridiculous at times, And at those days, it was something like 90% or something. It was ridiculous that they took. So, bands would take off and go and live somewhere for a couple of years to get a tax break, So in that down,
I was watching a documentary just recently about that, actually, how
it's outrageous.
Like the Stones went and lived in France, and
yeah,
the Beatles, by that stage broken up, but they were all going off to live in different countries for that
yeah,
exact.
and the Isle of Man, that became a place, and Ireland as well, became a tax haven, so there was a lot of, and Spain, but yeah, so from that, I then got to, when the band stopped touring, then all of a sudden we got this lighting rig sitting here doing nothing. And it's like, well, let's take it to a production company. And I took it to a company called Tasco, and they were a major sound provider, but they didn't have any lights. They'd always just focused on sound. So all of a sudden, here's this lighting rig. And so it was a perfect fit, So straight away, I become the head of the lighting department because I brought the rig with me. It was a no-brainer once again. So so from certain choices that you make, you reap benefits from further down the road. So it's always hard. People say, well, would you have done something different, or would you have done a different tour at that time, or wouldn't you have rather done this tour? Well, I might have rather have done that tour, but would I have still ended up doing what I was, you know what I mean? It's one of those questions that'll just drive you insane if you think about it. So I tend to try to just say, no, I'm good where I was, But,
that's fair enough.
Yeah, the good thing about the production company, though, and from that time on, I worked for production companies. That's what I did. I worked in production companies because you have variety. I don't know why I keep coughing. I apologize. Because you can pick the tours you want to go out on because they have multiple clients, so it's quite good, like you go out on one tour, like I went out on Ozzy's first tour, Blizzard of Oz tour, and then I had a choice to not go out on the second one, which was good.
I was going to say, what was it like, seriously, working with Ozzy Osbourne? Because
it was chaotic. I've been talking backwards and forwards a lot with Bob Daisley, who's a bass player on that tour, and he's written a lot of Ozzy's hits for him and stuff. And he's an Australian, lives in Sydney, and he and I have been going backwards and forwards lately, and we've been sort of talking about it and stuff. And it was fun. They were good musicians. Kerbishley and Daisley and Randy Rhoads. It was great, but Sharon was a hot mess. Sharon and Ozzy were just a disaster, the two of them. It was like, oh my God, I don't know which one was worse, but so that was sort of tricky, and we weren't getting paid properly, and, we weren't getting our per diems, and then we found out we weren't getting our salaries weren't getting put in our bank accounts, and it was just chaos, So, but you know what? The audiences loved him. They just loved him. It's what it is the actual show itself each night is what gets you through. Whatever the situation is, if the show's good, you can do it again. If you're there and the show sucks every night, it's just the worst. It's the worst. You just don't, because it just drains all your energy, as opposed to a really good show. You get all this adrenaline going, and that helps you do the loadout to get all the gear out. You know what I mean? So yeah, so it's interesting. It doesn't have to be a good band, but it has to be a good show. Does that make sense?
Actually. Yeah, it does make sense. It does make sense, because from a person in the audience, the same thing, right? So, you know, there's people who go and see the same band 5 nights in a row because the show is so epic, and there's nothing worse as an audience member, and I love music, but to turn up to a live gig and you go, oh, that was terrible and I couldn't hear them, or something goes wrong, that's difficult. So tell us, who are some of the favorite people you've worked with in terms of the tour or the show?
It really does depend on where they're at. I have this conversation with a lot of people as well. It really depends on where they're at the time, with their relationship within the band, where their career's at, and even their relationships in their personal life. That can have such a dramatic effect on how much of a good time you have out there, Status Quo were just a dream to work with. They were just such fun guys. They were just down to earth. They were like, they'd include us in everything. And, still to this day, you talk with them, or the surviving members, and that's nice. And ACDC is the same, you can still talk to them and say hi and go and see a show and catch up. And so those things to me are way more important, than, if you want to go, the only tour I was told I couldn't do, like flat out, no, we won't have you on the tour, was the Eric Clapton tour. It was Eric Clapton when he was doing the Dominoes, Derek and the Dominoes. And I really wanted to do that tour. And you know what? I dodged a bullet, because that was the tour where he got booed off stage, where he'd argue with the audience, where he was too drunk to play. And yeah, he's a guitar hero and all this sort of stuff, but he wasn't on that tour. You know what I mean? So it really affects, what they are, Same with Elton, I mean, I spent over 3 years with Elton, and two to 2.5 of those years were really good. But then when he had his problems with, when he's decided he's going to marry a woman and wanted to have kids and all this stuff, it was like, the hell's going on? And of course, no one would tell him no, because he's the star. If you say no, he's going to fire you. And not just him. I mean, it's a standard thing. So, this train wreck was allowed to continue down the road. And it was like, it just turned into this big mess. And it was horrible, and it was sad, really. It was a shame. So
but how amazing for you, as you say, to spend 2.5 years with someone, he and Bernie, obviously kind of an amazing kind of team in terms of songwriting and to be out on that stage. And they were innovative, right? So Elton John was so innovative and doing such cool stuff that no one else was really doing at the time.
Absolutely. And people like Chris Thomas, his producer, I mean, Chris came out for he came out for pretty much the whole American tour 1 year. And from that, I got to hook Chris up with INXS. And that's how he ended up producing INXS's, 3 albums, because he'd already said no to them. He'd met Chris Murphy, their manager, and for some reason, the two of them didn't get on. So he said, no, I'm busy, I can't do it, But then they came back at me and said, you're with Elton, right? Yeah. Well, do you think you can get Chris to come to a show? So, yeah. And Chris said, yeah. And he came to the show. And out of that, that 3-album deal was done, and they all did really well out of it, So, it just depends. It's not always even the stars who you're working for. It can always be someone else, like photographers and things like that. Some of the photographers, well, actually all the photographers who provide photos for my book, Loud, they were just so generous because I toured with them and I knew them, and I mean, that's their livelihood. They make their living out of selling those pictures, but they were nice enough to let me use those images, which is just wonderful. I mean, it's nice because it makes you realize that, you are accepted in this industry. People are prepared to go an extra mile for you and do something, which is really nice. Yeah,
it's great. And it really, in the book, it kind of brings the book to life, because you do get to see who you were, this sort of, your journey, I guess, as it goes on. And you've worked with so many extraordinary people. And as you say, not just the front people and the stars, but all the people behind the scenes, producers, photographers, heads of record labels, Michael Gudinski, whomever it may be. Right.
Exactly. I mean, when I did Iggy Pop, I mean, Bowie finally turned up, hallelujah, so put Iggy out of his misery, it wasn't wasn't quite the meeting I'd envisaged, but you'll have to read the book to figure out what we're both laughing at. And, but it's some of the interesting people that come around, like, with Elton, he'd always have Freddie Mercury and Rod Stewart would turn up, and the 3 of them together were just a nightmare. Just so naughty.
Nightmare in all the best ways.
Absolutely. You know what I mean? So again, and then there's other bands that are just really laid back, like your Pearl Jams and people like that, who, EMF was a great little band to work with. They were just happy, fun guys having a good time. There's a bunch of little Brit guys from England, and it was, and who just happened to have a #1 album, So, it's the times you're with them, and, Pearl Jam, Lollapalooza finished and we went straight to Hawaii, and they decided they're going to play every island. No one plays every island in Hawaii. So Hawaii was, why? Because they want to go surfing on every island. They're surfers. So, all different vibes, it just depends who it is and where they're at the time, But that's what makes it interesting, I think,
And so your journey takes you to the States, and you're still living in the States now. So how did
Yeah.
how did that come about? Obviously you went because you toured, but why did you stay? Or was it just because that's where the music was and that's where the scene was?
At the time, I spent 9 years based in England. And then I got transferred because the company Tasco opened up over here in Los Angeles. And so I got transferred over here. They sponsored me to come into the country and stuff like that. So I got transferred here, which was good because I just couldn't hack the cold weather in England. It was just doing my head in. The first summer there was 76, and they still talk about that summer. It's hilarious. The British are so funny. They still talk about the summer of 76, and that was my first summer there. And so I thought, oh, well, if it's like this, I can handle the cold for a few months. So I waited and I waited and I waited. And like 9 years later, no, it never happened again. 9 years later, it's like, I'm out of here before I get like rising damp or something. It's like, I got to go. But yeah, so I got transferred over here, and continued working with Tasco. And, I liked it here. I liked the weather. I liked the bigness of the country. I liked the different attitude. I mean, very different to the British. I mean, I love the British. I love their sense of humor. I just love it. It's just too cold. I mean, it's like here. I mean, if I was living, in some place, probably if I was living in Chicago or something like that, where it gets blisteringly cold, and I probably wouldn't have lasted that long either. You know what I mean? I probably would have gone somewhere else. But, because LA, California, it's, pretty much sunny the whole time. It's like, it just suits me. Plus, it was also a really good place to be career-wise, because there was 3 other major production companies based in LA that were mostly British, and because I'd spent so long in Britain, I knew all these people, I'd worked with these people. So I got other work through them as well, and that's how I got transferred back to Paris, was with one of the other companies, Light and Sound, which is now PRG. And they're still a major company, or they're the major company to this day. And, they sent me back to Paris, to do a 7-month residency with Johnny Hallyday, so, and that was the biggest lighting rig that had ever been built. So, and they wanted me to do it, and Johnny wanted me because I'd done a couple of tours with him while I was based in Europe. So, things like that. It was easy access to everywhere being here, At the time, it was still too early to be in Australia and have people call you up and want to fly you halfway around the world to come and do a 3-week tour or something. It couldn't happen. It wasn't feasible, So, and then, I think I just got used to being here. That's what happened. I don't know.
The weather.
Yeah, I think, just you get used to it, and that's where you are. And it's like, oh, well, whatever. Will I go somewhere else eventually? I'm sure I will, but I still fantasize there's an island somewhere, there's a tropical island somewhere with my name on it. That's my idea.
And was it a bit of a shock when you went, say, from England to LA? Because the music scene in LA was so different, from the British music scene at the time.
It was, but like I said, I was working for all these British production companies. So it was kind of the same with a different backdrop. You know what I mean? I mean, there were all these hair bands and stuff going around. It's like, whoa, what's that? Whoa. I keep doing this. I'm sorry. But I need to get myself a better headset is what I need to do. Or I need to stop talking with my hands, one or the other.
I'm a hand talker as well, don't worry.
I think I need to stop talking with my hands. But, it was a different vibe, and it was a time for a change. So I was quite happy to be here. And it's kind of this bigger, more open vibe to it. You know what I mean? So I enjoyed touring over here. I've always enjoyed being here. I mean, if I didn't like it, I wouldn't be here, But yeah, so.
And so tell us how did the book come about? And because you've had such, obviously, an extraordinary career, so it makes sense it would be in a book, but how does that sort of come about? Did someone suggest it, or you just thought, I have to get this out?
No, I had no intention, no goal of writing a book, or, I never kept a ledger. I never kept a diary. I never kept any of that sort of stuff, which was a shame when it came to writing time. It would have been so much easier if I had. But I never wrote anything down. I thought if someone found it and read it, they'd probably think I was insane. So I always thought it's best not to write anything down. so actually, a total stranger actually approached me over here in the States and said he wanted to do a screen treatment of my life, And I think what it was, he'd read Mark Evans's book, Mark, the bass player for Acdc early on. And Mark mentioned me in his book. And so he got kind of curious, who's this person? And then he sort of found out that I was mentioned in a few other books as well, and he started doing research. I had no idea of any of this, mind you. But, and then somehow he found me. I think it must have been through Mark or someone, but I don't know how he found me on my cell, you know what I mean? But I didn't talk to him for ages. It's like, who is this guy? So I didn't answer, And finally, I answered and said, "What? Look, who are you? What do you want? You keep calling me. You drive me nuts here. What's going on?" And he told me, So I met with him a couple of times, just curious, But I think he really wanted the gossip on the bands and the dirt on the bands and that kind of. He was a younger guy, and I think that was kind of his approach to it. And that's not what I was interested in. I respect the people I've worked for. I'm not here to dig dirt on them. I'd rather tell a story that's either heartwarming or a look at them that you haven't, a fan hasn't seen that side of the artist, or, a personal moment, something like that. I think that's much more interesting. Most of them have written their own biographies by now anyway. They're either dead or they've written their own biographies and spilled all their own dirt anyway. So I don't think that's my job. But so I sort of passed with him and said no. And then a guy in Australia calls me and goes, I write biographies. Why don't I write your biography? And it's like, you now, what is going on? And so we went backwards and forwards for a little. It got me curious. The bottom line is, between these two men, it got me curious and it got me thinking that way. And so, I thank them for that. And I do acknowledge them in the book. In the thank yous, and they got me thinking. And so then, of course, I didn't realize it was going to be like a 2-year massive project. It's like, oh God. but it takes a really long time to write a book, And I was in Australia promoting another book, which I was in as well, called Roadies, which was Stuart Coupe's book. And so all the proceeds for that were going to an organisation called Support Act. And they look after crew people who are either, their health's failing, or they've had an accident, or just whatever. They need help. So he was donating all the funds to that. So I came down to Australia to help promote it. And from doing that, I did a lot of television for that and a lot of radio and stuff. And out of that, I got approached by an agent and a publisher, HarperCollins. So I guess one good deed deserves another. so out of that, I finally found where it should be, and the book was almost finished at that point. So that was nice. But they gave me an editor and stuff, so I worked with them and did that sort of thing, and that's how we finished it off. So yeah, it was an interesting journey.
Oh, it's fantastic, and I'm so pleased that you in the end wrote it yourself. And had a good editor with you as well, which is brilliant, because it's really interesting. And it's funny how you say that someone approached you and wanted to do a screen treatment, because in reading your story, you can absolutely see how it would lend itself to either a film or a series, because it's such a fascinating journey. And
wouldn't that be fun?
It would be so much fun.
So anybody out there, hello.
It's an incredible story. And I think, to have the reputation that you have in the music industry around the world, globally, is huge. And to be a woman who has paved the way for other women in the industry, and still, as you say, it's very male dominated even to this day. I'm fortunate enough to get to work with mentoring, up and coming women in the industry. And, I do a lot of speaking events and things like that. And so, I'm still continuing to support women in the industry as much as I can, wherever I can. So, it's a nice thing. It's a good feeling. And it's nice, when someone reaches out and just says, thank you. It's like, oh, oh. No,
so, it's really epic. It's good.
Yeah.
No, it's good.
And that's what we're all about here is, women supporting other women. So I actually really love that you do that, and that you
Yeah.
are, helping other women to kind of rise in an industry, as we say, that is still male dominated, as a lot of industries are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems
Yeah, I
very.
mean, you've got to, spend the time, if you've got the time, give it, and I'm all for that. Absolutely.
I love that. And I love that about you. Your story is incredible. Your book, Loud, is out now and it is incredible. I hope everyone rushes out and buys it. As you say, it's now available, to buy the book. And as you say, you've actually, so the Audible version, it's on Audible, I think.
Yeah,
And you've recorded the book yourself.
I did. Yeah. And that was an interesting experience as well. As just sitting in a room with just my own voice coming back at me. It was like, oh, why? So it was like, ooh. So yeah, we spent a few days and did that, and it was nice. I mean, I got into it. I enjoyed doing it. So, usually I'm looking after someone else who's in the booth.
And how long does that take actually to record a book?
Well, we had 4 days. So what I did, we started, they at the beginning naturally, and just read through the book. But what I learned was I got more relaxed as we went along. So even though we only had 4 days, I had time to go back and redo the first few chapters. So it was more relaxed and more natural and stuff, or in my mind anyway, I wanted to make it better, so, and I had time to do that. So that was good, so for, yeah, 4 days. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I guess, what advice would you have for anybody listening to this, younger women coming up or whatever, it doesn't, or men who really want to get involved in the music industry and work as a roadie? What would be, your number one tip? What would be a few tips?
Well, what a lot of people do now is they go to school for it. There's colleges where they're doing like 4-year courses and things like that, and that's great. That is good, but they have to remember that it's an industry that it's very hands-on and it changes day to day. So what you learn in theory in class, that's great, but listen to your people when you're out on the road. If that's the path you choose, that you want to tour, you want to travel with bands, that's what you want to do, then, as soon as you can, get an internship or get a mentor, and listen to them though. I mean, if you're taught one thing in school and they're telling you something else, use your brain and figure out, is one right, is the other right, or are they both right? And you just need to adapt it a little bit. The whole thing the industry is about is adapting. You've got to be able to adapt on your feet. You've got to be able to think on your feet, and you've got to be strong, both mentally and physically. You do need to be strong because it's exhausting out there sometimes. It really is. But the benefits from it are unmatchable, I think. I just think it's unmatchable. It's a career that I'm so happy I chose. It's a career and a lifestyle that I still live to this day. And if that's what you want to do, and now I believe it's easier now, even though the productions are larger, and they keep getting bigger, that's going to stop. That'll bring itself into line. But you've got communication, you've got your cell phone, you've got an iPad, you've got a tablet, you've got free phone, WhatsApp, whatever, Skype, Zoom, you can be in touch with your loved ones, you can be in touch with your families, and you can even do courses online while you're out there touring. You can be learning about what you're physically doing on that stage each day. If there's something you're not getting, you can Google it, for God's sake. So, use everything that's open to you. Don't just sit back and go, oh, I've landed a gig, that's all I have to do now. Don't settle. Don't ever settle, and just have fun.
That's great advice.
Yeah, because if it's not fun, it's not worth it, because it's hard work.
It's hard work and often not a lot of money. So, when you're starting out, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to work your way up. It doesn't matter that you've done 4 years. You're not going to walk in with white gloves and start mixing the front house sound. It's not going to happen. And you'll be glad when you learn. You'll understand straight away. You'll think, but I just went to school for 4 years. Well, the guy who's standing next to you who hired you has been doing this for 30 years.
Yeah.
So listen to him, or her. Listen. When someone's offering you advice, be humble and accept it.
And I guess to take it all in, and the more of an all-rounder you can be, the bigger the career you might have.
And you can make up your own mind, what you keep and what you don't, because not everyone's going to be an Einstein and come out with this, earth-shattering, ideas that are going to help your career. Some people are going to tell you stuff and you're going to go, you're mad. And they will be. They are mad. It's like, oh my Lord. But you'll learn how to siphon through it, so... and always pass on the knowledge, don't ever go for the job security thing. Like, I'm not going to help that person because they're after my job. Well, if you're nervous like that, then you've been promoted above where you should be anyway,
Great advice.
So learn more.
Great. Yeah. Great advice, actually.
If you're nervous, learn more.
Well, Tana, thank you so much for joining me in the confessional. I'm so honoured to meet you and thrilled to be able to chat with you. As I said, I will put up the links for your book and where people can purchase that. And I'm going to keep everything crossed that they turn your book into a Netflix series or something, because it's awesome.
Wouldn't that be fabulous? Yeah, and there's a website as well, which is tanadouglas.com. So you can put all the social media up as well.
We'll put it all up, and they can follow you on Instagram as well, etc. And we'll put that up as well. So
brilliant.
Thank you so much for sharing your incredible wisdom here.
It's been my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is brought to you by WB40, Women Beyond 40 magazine. Available now at WB40.com. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to quality podcasts. We're also now available on YouTube. We chat with really interesting women about their hard-won wisdom, but it really helps us if you can subscribe, like, and share the podcast. Thanks so much for your support. Bye for now.